So this is the Senate Education Committee, Tuesday, April 22nd, about 1:30. For most of the day today, we are simply soliciting input on the House passed version of H 454. Get the bill right. And things like, well, anyway, I won't suggest anything. Just gaining reaction from people about their take on the bill and things they like, things they don't like, things they'd like us to consider. So I know that Jay Nichols is here, but I know we've got other places he has to be. He squeezed us in, so we're going to put the on my Jay. You are with, I always forget.
Executive Director of the Vermont Principals Association, Senator.
Forgot, I knew one of the V's there. So we'll start with Jeff, and given the schedule, if we could think about everybody kind of being on and off, including questions in 15 minutes, that would be about right. So Jay, you're on.
Yeah, I can do mine in 15 minutes. If you have questions at the end, feel free to ask. So again, for the record, Jay Nichols, Executive Director of the Vermont Principals Association. I was a principal in both supervisory school districts and supervisory unions, and I've also been a superintendent of both of those governance structures. My comments for this committee are around governance, scale, and opportunities for students, as I believe these issues are most germane for your committee. My comments are directly related to H454 as passed in the House and any related considerations. First of all, in making changes to the delivery model, we can improve opportunities and real outcomes for students. Simply, in my opinion, moving from supervisory unions to slightly larger school districts all by itself would be a step in the right direction. The House plan would eventually lead from well over 100 districts to likely somewhere between 20 and 30. This, I think, would provide economies of scale and increase the population of what we call a school community from one town to a greater number of towns without completely eroding local control. The bigger our districts, the less local control we will have. So I want to make sure that that's clear. I think the House plan has a balance between local control and state responsibility, at least compared to the 5-district plan the administration has proposed. In the House plan, it's likely that over time some small schools would close, but at least citizens would have much more say than they would have in any mega district plan. With H454, it's my hope that we can increase opportunities for students by getting to a better scale without completely destroying an education system that has been placed for over 2 centuries and without eroding Vermont's commitment to democracy and some level of local control. So some specific reasons why our board supports H454 or supported it at least in the House. We believe it's a thoughtful transitional approach that doesn't completely blow up the system overnight. And we think this is especially important with the chaos coming out of Washington, D.C. right now. We also think it strengthens the state board and seeks to make the board politically neutral, which is critical to avoid administration overreach in public education. We believe it allows for district lines to be drawn up for a proposal to the General Assembly, at least in part by experts who have actually worked in the field and understand the dynamics in local communities. We believe the plan recognizes that for there to be scale in many parts of the state, construction funding support will be critical. We also believe it provides for required class sizes, but allows for exemptions and waivers where appropriate. It protects independent schools that serve over 51% of their students through public funds and who serve as quasi-public schools in various parts of the state. And finally, it calls for an aligned school calendar, common graduation requirements, and common data systems across the state. With just over 80,000 students, this makes total sense and should be accomplished regardless of what else we do. I do personally think some changes in governance need to take place. It's not likely that fundamental changes in opportunity will increase without governance changes in our state. However, as I've mentioned previously, the larger the district, the more likely that local citizens will feel less empowered. I think it's key to try and find a balance between using scale to provide more educational opportunity while keeping the small school district feel that Vermonters want. I believe with some work, H454 can achieve that balance. When I say some work, I mean work for you folks. Now, I wholeheartedly believe larger supervisory districts that are at a scale of 2,000 to 4,000 where practicable, in some places in Vermont they're not, is the way to go. I do not believe that the supervisory union structure is an appropriate governance structure when the state is trying to guarantee opportunities and better academic and social outcomes for all students. I also believe that I say the wrong run here, my own notes, in the long run is what I meant to say. Supervisory districts are more likely to support schools that are small by necessity, while in a supervisory union, these schools are likely to eventually be starved out of the system. Let me share a couple of specific reasons why I believe SDs are better than SUs. The first is the transient student supervisory union versus supervisory district example. Students from low income families move at twice the rate or more compared to their higher income peers. And one national study from the US Department of Ed found that approximately 30% of low income students had changed schools 3 or more times by eighth grade compared to just 10% of higher income students. Here's why this matters. In a supervisory district, if a kid moves from one school to another, the school board is still the same school board, same superintendent, same governing rules, same employees. They can allow that student easily to stay in that school. Whereas in a supervisory district, the student is now switching boundaries and going to another school. And in very few cases are they going to allow the student to continue in that same school they were at before. And our most vulnerable population of students moves the most. That's one reason why I think districts are better than supervisory unions. Another example is in terms of teachers and the reduction of force, teacher protection. Example is if I hire a new teacher at any town elementary school and I'm my own district, and we have to RIF that teacher's out of a job and they're looking someplace else. If we're a little bit bigger district consisting of 3 or 4 towns or more, we can actually, that teacher has protection and they can have job protection to take a job in one of the other schools in our system. The larger scale also allows for more courses, especially at the high school level. A perfect example, my last year as a superintendent, Richford High School had 2 AP classes, Enosburg High School had 9. Richford kids could not take classes at Enosburg. Enosburg kids could not take classes at Richford because at the time they were a supervisory district. I mean, a supervisory union. Now those 2 towns are a supervisory district and they can share courses. It's a much better model for kids. Online learning courses within a district without employee issues and issues around collectively bargained agreements are much easier in a supervisory district than they are in a supervisory union. And special education services for students who move within district versus within SU are much easier to provide. If I set up a program for a kid at any town elementary school and he moves 2 towns over where the Everytown elementary school is there, but there's busing available and I've already got a program for him, I can continue to provide that program for him without him changing. Now, the analogy I will give you is this. If I go to Hannaford's to do my shopping in St. Albans, and there's a sale at Price Chopper just down the road, I can't say to Hannaford's, I want to buy the Price Chopper price bananas. They're 2 distinct stores. The same is true with school districts. They have their own employees. When you have a bigger district, you have more latitude. When you're in a supervisory union, it's sort of like the Articles of Confederation. You're a loose configuration. You can do some things, but you don't have the authority that a school district has. So to me, that's a much better model in most places in the state. Lastly, in closing up here, at commission meetings and principal meetings, which I have every week, and in conversation with Vermont citizens, it's important to acknowledge that not many people are hollering for bigger school districts or closing of smaller schools. Everyone supports some level of change, provided it's not them that has to change. That said, what we have heard repeatedly is that people want more transparency in the education funding system. They by and large want lower taxes. At the same time, they support their schools overwhelmingly. If we come out of this legislative session with a plan that will reduce costs at the very least slow down the rate of increasing costs in education spending, I believe many Vermonters would call it a win. Further, nothing in this plan really addresses the cost drivers that public education is facing, especially health insurance increases as the most glaring example. And we owe it to Vermonters to try and find a way to address these cost drivers that have nothing to do with providing a quality education to Vermont children. Finally, I would rather very little happen this legislative session than for something bad to happen that hurts our schools. And then below, Senators, I've listed some sightings, including one from UVM that talks about that student mobility issue, which to me is one of the biggest issues in terms of test scores, in terms of providing academic outcomes for our students, is our most vulnerable population moves a lot, has to change schools, and fall further and further behind. And that's it, subject to any questions you folks may have.
Jay, I'll have one. You talked about the SUs versus the SDs. If that's really a matter of scale, right? Because a district within an SU that's the same size as a SD really accomplishes everything you talked about. Would that be correct?
I think it could be, depending on the size of the scale. So if you had like an SU that I'm not sure I said, yeah, an SU that was really huge and you had a bunch of districts in it, within those districts, you would have the opportunity to do the things I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Across the
Okay.
whole SU, you would not. And I
Yeah.
think that the other advantage of like the governor's plan of going to districts is you would have those advantages that I'm talking about, but they may not be really realistic, Senator, because the geographical spread of the 5 district plan is way too much. So you wouldn't really be able to take advantage of those opportunities as easily.
Okay. Yes, Senator Weeks.
Can I follow up?
Yeah.
So, Jay, this whole conversation about SUs versus districts, the reality is we're talking about districts that are larger than the current SUs by a factor of 10 or more. They're big. Does it really matter whether we call them SUs or districts when we're talking about the largest group, the largest organization in the group?
Yeah, I think it does because with an let me give you an example. Nothing says you have to come up with these mega districts that the governor's proposing. You could do something that's more nuanced, like the House proposal, or even something that's less than that. But by moving to school districts, supervisory districts, instead of supervisory unions, there's one governance, one superintendent, one set of expectations. You can share resources back and forth. A lot of those things sometimes you can do through partnerships and supervisory unions, but it's not always that way. And especially when kids move from one school to another or staff lose positions, they lose that ability to have that protection. And I think in this time where it's hard to get teachers and our most vulnerable students are suffering the most, we should do everything we can to not have them have to change positions and careers if at all possible. So if you were going to go with a big plan the governor said, which I totally don't support, I don't think it probably would make a lot of difference. But if you're going to go with a plan that I think is going to be better for kids in the long run, I think you're better off going with school districts, supervisory districts.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Do we still have a few minutes with that?
Yeah.
If I can, so Jay, on your first page, you make a comment which ends with, quote, without completely destroying an educational system. Can you highlight where in H454, which passed the House, where that completely destroys the educational system? Can you be a little more? It's quite an alarmist statement, and I kind of want to tamp things down just a little bit.
Yeah, let me be really clear. I'm saying without doing that. We support H454 because we don't think it does do that. We're
Okay,
saying that
that's better.
something like what the governor proposed, we think that would completely erode local control. With the plan that 454 is talking about, where you had districts that were, we think the number should be between 2,000 and 4,000. We realize they settled on the number 4,000 if at all possible. We think that districts of 2,000 to 4,000 supervisory districts are small enough where you would have local towns that already have working agreements with each other and do a lot of things together. We think it would be easier for them to form this new governance structure because they would be neighbors, their kids already go to the prom with each other, they all know each other, as opposed to a big mega district like in the governor's plan, one of which is from Richford up near where I live all the way to Shoreham. We think that doesn't make sense. We think that would erode local control. Sorry if I wasn't clear on that, Senator. We think having 20, 25 districts probably makes sense. We think having 5 does not make any sense at all.
Okay, I just didn't want to gloss over the fact that it's a very alarmist statement. And I'm not sure, I don't think anybody in this room is trying to destroy the educational system in Vermont. But
No, I don't either. And that's why I said I think H454 tries to balance that, because if we become bigger, we are going to lose some level of local control. And I think we have to decide what is that balance.
I get that, Ben.
Yeah.
That point's very clear. It's just where your philosophy led to that comment about destroying the education system, I didn't think was completely necessary.
Okay.
Can I on the second page, you throw in some data about students from low-income families moving twice the rate, et cetera. how's that relevant to the conversation that we're having?
So if you're talking about, that was in relationship to the conversation around why SDs are better than SUs. So the example is, if I move, we can use my old system as an example. If I move from the town I live in, Berkshire, to Enosburg, even if I live closer to Berkshire School, I got to change schools because I'm in a supervisory union, I'm in a district. If I'm in a supervisory district where they're all one board and it all belongs to the same school system and we share resources and we're all together, then I don't have to change schools. We have situations, Senator, in this state all the time where our poorest kids move
Okay,
from
so
one
is
town to another and have to change schools.
any data on whether these transitions of schools are, job dependent, that the parents picked up a job in a different area and they're not even in the same district, same SU? I mean,
No, this is about kids moving from.
Yeah, just a sec, Jay. It seems, the comment seems to indicate that we're not sensitive to low-income families and their necessity to move, and we need to remain cognizant of that issue.
Yes, we do.
So
Totally.
okay.
Yeah. So that doesn't mean that every kid that moves is moving because they're in poverty, anything like that. It means that kids that are in poverty are 3 times more likely to move, and oftentimes they move 1 or 2 towns over. If you've talked to superintendents that have been in these situations, I was one of a very poor district. We would have kids move from Richford to Enosburg, have to change schools, move over to Alberg or Highgate or Swan, St. Albans City, and then come back a year or 2 later, and they're changing schools 3, 4, 5, 6 times in their elementary experience, and they're starting all over again every time. With having bigger districts under the same governance, we could help that problem a lot. Could we eliminate it?
They're so
No.
likely to move. They're so likely to move because
Absolutely.
parents are moving.
Absolutely. But sometimes what happens is kids actually move closer to the school they go to and have to change schools. You know how Vermont maps are drawn up. So like up my area, when you live in Enosburg, up on Enosburg Mountain Road, you drive down the mountain road. There's no way to get the backside down. You come all the way down. You go right by Montgomery Elementary School. Then you go by Berkshire School. But you got to go to Enosburg because that's your school. If we were one district, those kids could easily go to Montgomery, 5-minute drives as opposed to an hour and 20-minute drive.
So then there is your point that you're driving towards larger districts or smaller districts?
I think we should have larger districts, as I said in my testimony. I think the goal should be districts around 2,000 to 4,000 where it makes sense to do so. There are some places like Canaan, of course, where it's not going to be practical, and we need to do what's best for the kids in that system. Those are great questions, by the way, Senator. Thank you.
Okay, and the final question is on your third page. It's about reducing costs at a very slow, reducing costs, or at least slowing down the rate of increasing costs. It's a good comments, but there's not a lot of specifics in here about how you would support doing that. So you kind of leave us on the edge of go do it, make sure this happens. But oh, by the way, here's a couple examples of how we think that we should be affecting that. And I'm curious.
Yeah, so I'm driving from here to South Burlington High School because I have a meeting there, and I'm testifying in Senate Finance when I get there. And in my testimony for Senate Finance, I give some financial examples, one of which is support for the class size minimum approach. If we're serious about cutting costs, Senator, what it's going to mean is having less personnel for the number of students we have. That's the only way that we're really going to get to that. And in H454, there are several financial things that I'm testifying on in Senate Finance today that do address that. I did break up my testimony to focus on the education piece for you folks and the finance for them. That testimony is already posted, and you could look at that, and I'd be glad to talk with you more. But the key is the number of staff we have related to the number of students we have. That's one variable in the state of Vermont that we can actually address within the school system. The rest of them, things like health insurance and stuff, we really can't address those.
Okay, thanks, Jay.
You're very welcome.
Senator Schiff, do the question.
I did. Just kind of form it to my head here, just drilling off of what we just heard regarding personnel. So, Jay, are you saying that in the jurisdiction that we have in this committee for the bill that we're working on, are you saying that the only cost driver that we can address is staffing?
No, I don't think that's the only cost driver. I think you can address the insurance issue. I'm not sure how you go about doing that. That's one of the things you can address. I also think if you put in a foundation formula, which is what you're talking about doing, that over time, that will bend the cost curve. However, as I say in my testimony to Senate Finance, the research across the country is pretty clear that in most places that put in a foundation formula, it usually leads to increased costs in the beginning. And the reason for that is people that the General Assembly in every state, they don't want to hurt kids. So they know that they need kind of a transition plan to get to those costs. And oftentimes, when you don't have an infusion of cash to help you start off the program, you need to at least meet education spending where it is. And that means you don't get to make a lot of major costs. Now, for example, the governor's plan would have saved close to $200 million. We know that. However, we also know that that would take many of the schools that are already at scale and make them have to do some drastic cuts. Many of those places that already are at scale and are already making cuts would have some immense pain, and kids would get hurt, which is one of the reasons why we are more supportive of the Tammy Colby financial plan than what the National Picus Odin plan, which is the same in every state they put it in terms of funding. We think Tammy Colby's numbers are much more accurate because they're more representative of where we are as a state right now and what we're already spending on education spending.
Thank you.
I don't think this plan is going to save a ton of money, though. I'm not going to tell you that it will, but I do think over time it could bend the cost curve.
Thank you. Yes.
In that regard, it may not affect the total cost of education, but will it affect, from your perspective, the quality of the education? That's the prime target.
I'm hoping. I really hope that it will. We have some schools that have 3-4 kids in a classroom. If we can find ways to combine them with a close by school and get classes of 8, 9, 10, 11 kids in a class, that's better educationally. If we can provide more opportunities for AP classes, exploratory classes for students in small high schools that right now don't have those opportunities, that's good for kids. So I think by getting to a better scale, we are going to be able to have better educational opportunities for kids. And I think we'll have better achievement in the long run for kids as well.
Thanks, Jim.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Sorry to run. I really appreciate your flexibility.
Really happy to get it. So, Chelsea Myers. Next is Chelsea Myers from the Vermont Defense Association.
Hi, all. Thank you for having me back again.
Just to be clear, we're really interested in reaction to the House passed version.
Yes.
Not the governor's proposal.
And you got some very detailed testimony from us several weeks ago. So that I think still, in the most part, stands. So I'll try to stick to a couple of broad themes and then be on the list. So at the Vermont Superintendents Association, we know that building a better education system isn't about quick fixes. It's about doing the hard, thoughtful, and necessary work of aligning our funding, governance, and operations with the values Vermonters hold dear: equity, opportunity, and sustainability. We come to you with one clear message: transformational change is necessary, and it must be done thoughtfully, intentionally, and with students at the center. Vermont has long held high expectations for its public education system, and rightfully so. We are a state that values equity, opportunity, and democratic engagement. But those values must now be matched with systems that can sustainably deliver on them. H 454, as passed by the House, offers a framework for change that is ambitious, comprehensive, and grounded in years of policy development. VFK supports the direction of the bill and urges the Senate to preserve its essential education policy components. We urge Vermont to proceed with care, because how we implement this legislation is just as important as what it contains. Major structural change is hard. Vermont learned this firsthand during the development and implementation of Acts 153, 156, and 46. Those goals of the law were sound, but exhaustion, opposition, lack of statewide support, and inconsistent follow-through prevented their full realization. If we are to succeed this time, we must apply all of the lessons learned. We urge the committee to proceed with a focus on long-term coherence, not short-term optics. Policy change of this magnitude demands intentional design, strong implementation planning, and continuous engagement with professionals and communities most impacted. Senator, you mentioned, do you think this would have an impact on quality? And I would say the details of implementation are essential to whether that results in quality changes or not just what's on the policy page. Change that lacks these qualities risks harming the very students and families we seek to support. Our association has testified extensively on the need to address the root cause drivers of the education system. While H454 and other legislation introduced this session have begun to tackle some of these issues, such as staffing levels, the broader systemic challenges driving education costs in Vermont remain largely unaddressed. We will continue to revisit these conversations year after year unless we confront the full picture. The lack of affordable housing, the rising cost of healthcare that consumes an increasing share of education budgets, the growing responsibility schools carry in providing mental health services, and the economic reality that without more livable wage jobs, Vermont will continue to face an aging population and a shrinking tax base. We also caution against the temptation to treat this district scale as a panacea. Cost efficiency will not be achieved by district merger alone. True scale must be addressed at every level of the system: governance, staffing, school size, class size, administration, and yes, labor contracts. Moreover, we caution against the assumption that district mergers will deliver immediate tax relief. In the short term, the cost of merging systems, including aligning contracts, operations, and infrastructure, may exceed any savings. Pay parity is an important goal, but it also represents a significant and currently unquantified cost. As we restructure, we must ask, what are we doing about contracts and current debts? Without a plan for managing these realities, we risk building a new system on an unstable foundation. We must be honest about those short-term costs. It is misleading to suggest that district scale alone will deliver meaningful tax relief, especially in the near term. It is also important that we not lose sight of the most important goal: increase opportunities for students. In what ways are we keeping students central to these changes? The working group created in 454 will be tasked with keeping research, data, and student opportunities front and center of the work. There is no evidence to support that merging into mega districts will have any measurable impact on student achievement or opportunities. In fact, there is no evidence that a 4,000 student minimum supports better student opportunity and operational efficiencies, especially in rural communities. Perhaps the most important shift we make in the moment is a philosophical one: to see students not just as the beneficiaries of public education, but as co-designers of its future. We deeply appreciate the committee's decision to hear student testimony this Friday. This is more than symbolic, it's foundational. As Cashel Higgins wrote in a recent op-ed in BT Digger, no one understands what's working and what's not better than we do. We're the ones in the classroom every day. We're the ones who experience the outcomes of these systems firsthand. H454 offers a rare opportunity to move Vermont's education system toward greater equity, opportunity, and sustainability. We support its direction, but success will require more than good policy language. It will require deep listening, long-term investment, and the courage to lead through complexity rather than around it. The work ahead will be hard. Change of this magnitude requires patience, clarity, and deep respect for the complexity of Vermont's educational landscape. It will take serious collaboration, and we're ready to do our part, and we're grateful for your commitment to getting it right.
Okay, thank you. Questions?
I think the Superintendent's Association was kind of the clearest in underscoring school construction.
Mhm.
That's a really important point. It's my favorite conversation. Because I think if we are going to see any regionalization that creates greater opportunities, it's going to be state-of-the-art high schools and CTE centers, and just state-of-the-art facilities that give kids different opportunities. I am going to be reviewing that section of H454 with Legislative Council. I just don't want us to make work and sort of, just go over ground we've already gone over, but maybe look at the Massachusetts School Building Authority, what kind of experts we actually need to have a meaningful conversation and come back ready to create financing mechanisms and build in the kind of incentives. I think that would look at more secondary level regionalization.
Mhm.
So I just am seeking maybe you all's partnerships, or I know you don't want to badmouth H454, but that section does feel like it needs work. If you all have any suggestions you want to send along.
I think the premise we're in general support of, because it's grounded in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, but in terms of line by line, I'd have to go through it again and look at
If you all could, that
It's
would.
been a long time in the making, so
Right, yes, that would be
be
great.
happy to.
Thank you.
So are you in support of the notion of getting a foundation formula in place sooner rather than later?
Yeah, so, sorry, I included that in my finance testimony as well in that year, so that's available on the finance website. Yeah, we think it needs to be thoughtfully sequenced so as not to completely erode, student opportunities, in, school districts. And I think getting the nuances of that foundation formula are essential. And we have some recommendations in our Senate finance testimony to make that how we feel would be a little bit more aligned with what we're looking for in terms of aligning education policy goals with finance goals and really thinking about how are we funding a system in which we want to be over time without eroding student opportunities. Generally in support of the foundation formula, but in support of getting it right.
And did you mention class sizes and school sizes in your testimony?
We did not in this testimony because we came in several weeks ago and did a pretty deep dive into scale and funds. You've heard a lot from me already.
Senator Hershey.
Thank you. Regarding district sizes,
Yes.
I'm hoping to hear a little bit more on that because I'm looking at the line on page 2, about halfway through where it says there's no evidence to support that merging the mega districts will have any measurable impact on student achievement or opportunities. And also that there's no evidence that a 4,000 student minimum supports better student opportunity and operational efficiencies, especially in rural communities. So is it correct to say that the takeaway from that is try to not mess with the district sizes, or do you have additional thoughts?
It's more to suggest that I think the approach to have a group looking at this and thinking about all the nuances across our state, geographical, feeding patterns, and all of those things is really important. The more I look at a map, the more complexities emerge, and the more I have conversations with people, the more complexities that emerge. And the 4,000 minimum thinks about like the Northeast Kingdom of how big of a geographical spread you would have to come to make a district of 4,000 students, and what would be the implications for being connected to community, and then also for transportation and special ed services as well. And so we did not recommend that 4,000 minimum, as you have heard from us. Like, we testified on some of the research based on district scale, and nothing suggests the minimum. So potentially changing to like an average, although I'd have to look more closely rather than a minimum, because accounting for those rural communities, I think, is really important when we do this work. Yeah. Whereas in Chittenden County, it might make total sense, right, to slightly larger. But when you're talking about some of our rural communities, you're talking about a huge geographical area.
I think this committee has 2 minutes with all issues.
Yeah.
Well, I mentioned that, but you would agree, or would it be fair to say, what's your position on, we have 119 districts now?
Yeah. We are in support of the working group going towards greater district scale, grounded in research, which is around 2,000 to 4,000. But again, like, some of those nuances might not put you exactly at 20 or exactly like like a little bit of flexibility there, I think, is really crucial for Vermont and all of its uniqueness. So.
Thank you. Thanks.
That was easy. Thank you.
Flora Diaz. President of the Vermont School. You want to introduce yourself, actually.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Flora Diaz. I'm the president of the Vermont School Board Association, and I appreciate the chance to speak with you today. Can everybody hear me okay? Sometimes my voice is low, so everybody good?
Yes.
Okay. I'm here to talk about H54 as passed by the House. The decisions that you make or choose not to make will have lasting consequences for public education in Vermont and for the long-term viability of our communities. As we shape the future of education, we're also shaping the future of democracy in our state, and we want for the nation. Just yesterday, I was at White River Valley Supervisory Union Board meeting and heard from many thoughtful and concerned school board members. Their comments reflected a deep worry about the pace of the change and the magnitude of the proposal in this bill. Those voices underscore the need for inclusive and deliberate conversations. It is important to remember that school boards across Vermont bring a wide range of perspectives to the table. ESBA respects that diversity of thought, and we encourage each of you to actively reach out to board members and citizens in your regions. Hearing directly from the most impacted will help ensure that the final outcome of H 454 is aligned with the values and goals of our communities. We appreciate the time and effort that has been taken already to respond to the administration proposal and the subsequent bill H 454, which has undergone significant revisions as a result of months of testimony by all here and hard conversations. In its current iteration, it is evident that the legislators have worked to incorporate feedback and legitimate concerns from different communities. This bill communicates a desire to take a measured approach to ensure that decisions about district scale are informed by public input, data, research, and geography, and to reflect a genuine understanding of the challenges our educators and school leaders face every day. Our hope is that as you continue this work, you will keep in mind the importance of realistic and compassionate timelines for implementation and support, that you remain open to incremental change to ensure consistency and continuity for student learning, and that you maintain a community-centered approach, honoring local voices informed by data and research, and understanding the numeric differences that impact specific changes in the system as a whole. This bill is also about equity and sustainability. It lays the foundation for a fair funding system with the base education amount guided by the work of Dr. Nicole, and additional resources for students with greater needs and furthest removed from opportunity. Regular reviews, you guys are familiar with this, but regular reviews to keep the formula responsive and relevant over time. H54 promotes better coordination across our state, aligning calendars, data system, graduation requirements, and access to career and technical education so that every student, no matter where they live, has clear and more equitable path forward. Most importantly, it reopens the door to long overdue construction funding, giving hope to communities with crumbling infrastructure. We were just talking about that. Here is our constructive input to the changes to improve the bill. You guys have a longer version there, but I'm not put you to sleep. So this is try to summarize every section there. So on section 1, it should be a little longer there. Right now, there's only a possibility of one retired school board member on the 9 boundary subcommittee. Given that school boards are local legislative bodies for education, that isn't enough. We strongly recommend that at least 2 former or retired board members have guarantees. Also, we believe that appointments should not be overly political. One solution could be that the commission recommends members to reduce bias and broaden expertise. These decisions are too important for partisan choices. And because the subcommittee and the school district board task force are doing closely linked work, consider overlapping this membership, or even combining them. This will help ensure the process is smooth, aligned, and informed by people who know what school governance works, how school governance works in Vermont. Like today, like all of us wanted to be in 2 places at the same time. It would have been great to be with finance and you guys and be able to hear that cross expertise at the same time. So in section 1, so if you move down to section 1, it's also school boundary subcommittee duties. The current draft says new districts should ideally have 4,000 students. We urge you to remove that number and instead require that district sizes be based in solid research. There's no magic enrollment number that guarantees quality or cost efficiency, especially not in rural states like Vermont. Research and practice both show that leadership, context, and smart resources use matter more. Let's keep the focus and actually keep students succeed at the top. In section 2A, school district voting ward task force, this group will recommend the number of school board members per district and how voting wards will be drawn. That for democratic representation and to how well school boards reflect and engage to their communities. We recommend that adding at least 1 more member, as we were talking about, to the task force. School boards are closer to them. In sections 4 and 7, I was just repeating that part there. Sections 4 and 7, the minimum class size and school size must be set carefully. If the goal is better education, not just cost savings, we need to understand what the research says and take into account the unique geographic and demographics of our state. We are also concerned about the timing. 7 different groups are working on overlapping issues at the same time under this bill. Many of the reports are due at once by December 1st of 2025, which makes coordinating difficult and risks mixing important insights. Let's take a step back and then you do that backwards planning. Make sure that standards for Small by necessity schools are in rush. This decision should be based on full information, including input from the commission, the subcommittee, the agency of education, and the communities affected. Rural students will have a constitutional right to education. We need thoughtful rules for the system to protect that right. And there's a little more information in their section there. In section 6, rule making and standards, the State Board of Education plays a big role in implementing H454, including class size minimums and graduation standards. We support instruction in the State Board to reduce political influence and ensure broader, fairer representation. Local school board members should have a voice here, and the board needs the resources to do its job well. I think several people have mentioned that, whether it's an increase in budget support or the collaboration with the agency of education. In the construction of and rulemaking, the agency of education has significant responsibilities under this bill. Before transferring rulemaking for school construction from the state board to the agency, we urge you to ensure that the agency has staffing and capacity to handle this work. In section 23, you guys okay? Remember that? Section 23, the State Board of Education membership, the VSBA task force mentioned, and you guys are familiar with that report, mentioned above, recommended restructuring the state board to ensure that it can act in a non-political capacity. We appreciate that H54 takes a step in that direction, expanding the appointment structure so that the governor does not have the sole authority for appointing members. Additionally, the state board makeup should be more proportionately represent local school board members from districts that operate as school board and a public school, and should have adequate resources to conduct its work. Data, so I'm getting to the end. So in data modeling and the cost drivers, which is kind of the last section. Finally, we want to stress how essential it is to have clear data and modeling to understand how the proposed foundation formula will impact school districts over time. Without that information, we cannot fully assess all these proposals. We appreciate that the bill focuses on adequate funding and want to highlight the need for a formula that reflects the actual cost of health benefits for school employees, costs that continue to rise each year. Right now, healthcare is one of the biggest drivers of educational costs. Due to the current statewide bargaining process, school employees, we were here just last week to testify on this. The school employees pay no deductible thanks to the health reimbursement arrangement, the HRA. Layered on top of the high plans, these costly benefits are consuming more and more local school budgets, which forces school boards to take top cuts in other areas. If healthcare costs keep growing and aren't accounted for in the new format, it could seriously squeeze out critical programming for students. This is why we urge you to take action in this session to reform the law governing how school employees' health benefits are bargained. This is urgent. The next round of bargaining begins in the spring of 2026 and will shape benefits through 2030. If you want to make a meaningful impact on this issue, now is the time. We're also submitting a 2-page document outlining steps the legislature can take to revise this law in a way that supports students, schools, and sustainable budgeting. I may add, it also supports teachers. H454 offers a chance, so in conclusion, H454 offers a chance to move our education system forward, but only if we proceed with care, compassion, and clarity. We urge you to slow down just enough to get this right. Let's make sure all the voices are heard, especially those from the smallest and most rural communities. Let's base this decision on data research and what truly helps students. I'm excited to hear that you're going to have students testifying. Most importantly, let's continue to invest in public education as a cornerstone of our democracy, one that is inclusive, equitable, and resilient through generations to come. Thank you for your time and for your commitment to all the students in Vermont.
Questions? Yes.
Thanks so much, Flora. I wanted to address the school district voting ward task force with you all, because I think this is very much where school board members, should have a voice. And it looks like you all were trying to fit yourself into the box of this task force. When this came up going through it, I said, I just have a concern with this whole section, and the chair might have had a different concern with the whole section that he would express. But my concern is that I don't know if we have to standardize this for each district. When we did Act 46, I thought it was really important that Addison County took it on very differently than Chittenden County might. And they wanted to figure out unique ways that certain small communities would lose employees. And I worry that trying to have one task force decide this for the whole state isn't even a productive thing to do.
Sure.
So,
That we craft language that creates the container in which those districts have the conversation. Maybe so. I think we had to do that for Act 46. But we didn't tell them how they had to structure their school boards. Jeff is looking at me like, but that's what I remember.
yeah, well, I think I want to, sort of walk us back.
Yeah.
So I think what we're trying to say is that we just want to add one more school government to that task force. I think it would be very, because of the timing that you
Mhm.
have, and I'm going to look to because of the timing that we have, we want this task force. I think we support this task force, and I think
Okay.
how you're moving forward, what we're trying to say is like, we want to be part of this conversation, and we need at least one more school board member. We're not saying that we don't think this task force can't get this done.
So you think and I just want to make sure I hear this
Yeah.
from VSBA. You think we should have a standardized way that each district votes coming out of this task force?
I'm looking at you guys, a standardized way that this, because the task force is gonna propose the districts.
But what they're okay, sorry. What they're gonna
Yeah,
You
we're
might be
talking about
talking
two
about
different task forces. Yeah,
I'm not sure you're both talking about the same.
yeah, I think that's why.
I'm talking about the school district voting board task force. There are a lot of words in this bill. But what maybe, okay. So above, you're saying that, or is it whichever section you're saying, hey, school board members add a lot of value, right?
Yeah,
They're
and the
people who
boundary
care
of the committee.
about
Yeah,
their
and the
communities.
Yeah.
But what I see and maybe I'm wrong, what I see the school district voting board task force being tasked to do is create equitable representation within the district for each community and each voter. But I believe that could look different in different districts. And does the School Boards Association want it to be standardized? Because that's what I think this task force would end up doing, is saying you each get to have 10 wards and they have to, be proportional this way, and you should have one student on there and blah, blah, blah. Which I want a student on there. But, unless we just gave parameters to the districts, we would be tasking this group with saying
the group can do it.
And you
know,
want-
like this, the work group, and unless I'm wrong, this group can do that, because I think they have the expertise to say, like, I have a board of 15 right now. Like, I could give you an example of right. Like, I have a board of 15. Do I need a board of 15 for 1,500 students? We don't have 1,500 students anymore. We have about 1,300, right?
Uh-huh.
So is that a sustainable way, and is best governance for my district? No, right? It's just, it's a lot of, it's a lot, but it's a lot of people to manage for not just the board chair, but for the superintendent, and for, to just get a student hearing, we need 8 people, so I think
Uh-huh.
this committee
Yeah.
can come up, like with the right expertise sitting at the table. You can look at all of the, have a democratic representation and still maintain an effective school board size
Mm-hmm.
I don't see why they couldn't.
So they should, you're saying the VSBA agrees that they should set a standard way that wards would be defined for every district in the state.
Use the appropriate data and
Okay.
and in collaboration with their communities, right? So it has to be that's where it has to have, what we're asking is that it has to have school board representation.
Uh-huh.
And that task force is really important. You're gonna be making those decisions.
But when you said in collaboration with their communities, I don't know how that would happen.
Because the school boards are engaged with their communities, right?
I may confuse myself. Okay. I don't want to put the VSBA.
I know, I'm like confused, and maybe
But
because it's like, I'm not just confused how.
Yeah, it to me seems like this would be trying to create a standard for governance in every district that's the same.
But it says that you would create, so if you go into, I'll just read the section. The school
Yeah.
district, well, because I think it might be either the school district boarding or task force is tasked with recommending the optimal number of school board members per school board to maximize public representation and democratic input while maintaining effective school board size, which is sort of the example I was trying to give.
Mhm.
And second, the boundaries for school district voting wards within each school district with alternative options if necessary.
Right.
If necessary. So including detailed maps clearly and unambiguously delineated ward boundaries that respect current municipal boundary line.
Right.
So there's a lot that goes into this. Giving these duties and their direct connection to school board governance, we strongly advocate for at least one more school board member represented
Okay.
in that task force.
So I'm not trying to belabor this, but so everyone's clear for the future on what my concern is. I'm going to try to use the example of ward redistricting in municipalities. So Burlington, several years ago decided, hey, we need another ward. We don't want it to be all UVM students, even though that's kind of what ended up happening. We then now have 8 wards. So we want 4 district counselors and 8, ward counselors. And they created a system that works very specifically for Burlington. So we usually rely on the local board of civil authority in a larger population center, for example, Rutland, anywhere, to come up with their own governance system that feels right for their political needs. We don't have a task force that tells municipalities how to structure their local voting systems. This would be a departure from that. This would be saying, we as a state task force are going to tell each of these district communities how to structure their government. That I don't know if that's a good idea.
You did it throughout 46, right?
Well,
When you have.
I don't think we did.
Well, that
We
put
didn't.
sense, because it was voluntary workers largely.
Right.
And they put their own system together, because they're very different across the state.
Right.
We were merging. That's what my district
Oh,
was saying.
okay.
So you did it in.
The district boards, as they merged, figured out their own governance structure.
Exactly.
And they are different in different parts of the state, and they work well, but the one where I am is very different, I think, from what you're talking about.
Yes.
From other parts of the state.
Yeah.
And so I understand what you're saying.
Okay.
It's something we have to-
And
it's
we
something
agree,
really
we
have-
agree that that is our connection with with our communities, right?
Mhm.
We want the representation to be fair, because
Mhm.
that's how we engage with our communities. That's how we all understand our vision, our mission, student outcomes. So it is important for us
Yeah.
that we are connected to our community. So how you balance that, right?
Yeah.
So-
Susan Gillespie, Executive Director for the Vermont School Board Association. I just wanted to add that this piece came in at the very last minute as an amendment at the end in the House. So it's not something that we, testified on in the House or
Oh,
anything
okay.
like that.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So the
We also
testimony
have-
today really is, if you're going to keep this in, we need more school board representation.
That's how I took it. But then I'm worried I may have confused everyone after that. But I did take it as, you're not wedded to this task force.
No,
No,
Okay.
we just want representation.
If it existed, you'd want more.
Questions? Yes.
On the first page, about halfway down, I think you say that hearing directly from the most impacted obviously is critical to the process. Who's the most impacted? Is it admin, teachers, students, parents? You left us hanging.
Yeah, and everybody, students at the end, right? Students are the most impacted in our communities, right? But this whole thing, as I see it, as an immigrant, you're stating the future of your communities, right? How we.
Yeah, but I thought you were kind of leading us to what group is most impacted. Who is most impacted? I wanted you to actually say it.
Who's
not
most
just-
impacted is our students, our future
Okay, that's what I
citizens,
want you to.
so we all should be thinking about that.
Thanks.
And just to sort of get a sense from you about the urgency that you're feeling on this or not. In 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, we had voters across the state voted for 20% increase. And that vote would have resulted, the legislature hadn't stepped in and tried to lower it, would have resulted in a 20% increase. Taxpayer vote now we're in an era of cuts. And we saw that across the state this year. And I think it would be fair to say that an era of cuts is not healthy either in and of itself, especially if it's constant. And so I guess then we had a lot of what I kind of heard you say is slow down and don't move back. You never really talked about when we should get a foundation formula in place and what's the urgency there. And I'm trying to balance or figure out where you think on the one hand, we have something that's coming unglued before our eyes, and we're trying to get to something new. And I understand that we always want to try to get it right. So, but I couldn't really figure out from the testimony, other than kind of slow down and do data and everything else. What actually where you are on that part of it.
I think we want you to continue to collaborate with all of us and be thoughtful about how you move forward. You just brought up a point about construction, right? Like look at it and look at it with attention. It's the same when you're talking about the duties of the new committee for the wards. So I think that we need to slow it down. The urgency this year, at least to us, when we were first testifying before H54, we wanted this to have gone to the commission for the future of public education. That's where we wanted this. We can't do that, right? So this is where we are right now. We're giving the testimony of where we are right now. So be thoughtful of the process. Make sure you're having enough data. Make sure you model the foundation formula.
Yeah.
So make sure you're making data-driven decisions and that are going to impact for generations to come the future of public education. So how you slow down the process is how you're getting all that information and how you're getting your accuracy in the data, and making sure that if you're putting something in the AOE, that they're going to be able to be resourced, have the people necessary to help us implement it in the district. If you are telling us that we are going to merge in a certain way, make sure that we have enough money for construction so that we can take care of that. If you're telling us that you want to, I don't know what is this going to look like. We really want you to be thoughtful of how you move it forward. This is a good start. H454, we were able to testify in the process. There's still a lot of things, as we said. This is constructive feedback that you have there, and we're going to go from this to finance, but we need more modeling in order to really testify and how to move forward.
Okay. Thank you.
Got two short questions for you. First one, 0 for 3. The testimony today focuses at healthcare as a cost driver. We get it. We agree. You're, as a school board representative, the president of the School Board Association. You're a member, I believe, of the negotiating parties. We're not really in a position to affect that directly, but you've highlighted the zero deductibles, $0 deductible. Are you anticipating a conversation with the other half of the negotiating party to positively affect healthcare costs?
What we're
That's all
asking you,
involved.
we were here just last week. What we are asking you is for a change in the composition of the negotiation, and we're asking you to
I think
allow.
that's sufficient.
I think, yeah, that would be
Okay.
great, at least to
That's-
start. And if when it goes to arbitration, if they're able to not just pick one side or the other side, but pick the best pieces of both and come into, an interest-based decision at
Okay,
the
so
end of
that's
that.
that's a
That's
better,
an actionable.
yeah, that's an actionable
actionable.
request as opposed to just stating that paying $0 in deductibles. That's
But it's just giving you an example, right?
Okay.
That's what the urgency is because of, and
okay. Thank you. And then second question is, we've had 2 task forces on school construction,
yes,
2 years of it.
you said, yeah.
Okay, good. Lots of good stuff there. On that topic, do you have recommendations on elements of those reports that you support or elements of those reports that you reject? You gotta go there.
I'm not prepared today. I would love to be more. I work on construction. I'm not prepared today to answer that question, and I've taken live view.
No, don't.
I don't have the information in front of me. I don't know, Sue.
We're getting there though.
Yeah, just
School-
if please do send it to us.
Yes,
Recommendation
happy to
of
look
section.
to look at that, but I'm not prepared today unless we could want to comment.
Because
Yes.
if I'm not mistaken, because I was a member of those boards, you
Yeah.
guys have representation on the board, on those task forces.
Yes,
So
I participated in the first task force like 3 years ago.
2 years ago,
Yeah.
1 year ago.
So then it was before that, because we've been doing this for as long as I've been in Vermont.
Okay, this stuff's pretty fresh and it's,
Yeah.
there's no good
Yeah.
reports. I just wondered if you do support or you don't support certain aspects, because that's a big issue. That's Senator Ron Hinsdale pointed out. That's where we're going.
We want support. Construction, yes.
Thank you. Thanks. Thanks for coming in. We've got benefits. Oh.
Good afternoon. For the record, Jeff Benn, Executive Director of Vermont EDA. Thank you for giving me a few minutes to speak with you about our preliminary thoughts about H 454. First, I'm going to start though with a little bit of a level set and talk a little bit about where we are, I think. In a word, Vermont's local public schools and the educators who work in them are doing great things. In fact, despite the rhetoric, they are more than making great. Our public schools are a place where all students from all walks of life can learn and thrive, and do learn and thrive. Vermont should be proud of its investment in its children, as Vermont is at the top in several measures of success. On the nation's report card, Vermont is top 3 in 8th grade literacy. Vermont compares favorably to larger and wealthier neighboring states, such as Massachusetts and New York. But we punch above our weight, I would say. Vermont is near the top in graduation rates, and we have some of the best and brightest graduates in the world. In fact, Nace Mitchell from Mount Aid, Shauna Tubb, Harwood, who between them won 10 Tony Awards, and Victor Ambrose from Woodstock, who won a 2024 Nobel Prize for Physiology or Medicine. And of course, have any of us ever heard of Grace Potter? She too is a proud product of our local public schools. So as are countless teachers, plumbers, doctors, electricians, and even politicians, including many of you and the governor. All the success comes from a system that funds more than just academics. The education fund pays for services that most states do not. For example, social and emotional student health. And we are seen as the most inclusive state in the country when it comes to educating students with disabilities. In short, we have much to be proud of when it comes to Vermont's publicly funded school systems. The Vermonters who work in our schools, classroom teachers, special educators, school counselors, librarians, bus drivers, paraeducators, custodians, food service workers, psychologists, occupational therapists, among others, have worked through a pandemic, through decades of long nationwide educator workforce shortage that results in staff vacancies in all buildings that all are in need of significant repair, as the buildings. But they show up every day to support our younger citizens, their students, and meet their needs, learn and realize their potential. Sometimes this includes supporting them through major milestones, and more often is about being stable, supportive, and caring adults in their everyday lives. Make no mistake, in a relatively poor rural state, our educators, our students, and our public education system is something to be proud of, and something we should preserve and strengthen. Vermonters routinely vote to increase taxes on themselves to pay for our local public schools, and we should be cognizant of that deep investment local communities have in those schools. Additionally, Vermont school boards and administrators are very vigilant when it comes to using limited resources wisely. The most recent town meeting day budgets, for example, reduced staffing by almost 400 educators. I think there was some discussion about that earlier. If this type of mass layoff, Vermonters getting a pink slip, were to happen in any other employment sector, it would have been headline news. This was done intentionally, transparently, and surgically and locally, which is to say communities throughout Vermont reduced staff to control cost, but hopefully not reduced academic opportunities for students. While this is the second year of staff reductions, and it is a worrisome trend, it was done with approval of local voters, not done to local school communities by the state. Layer on top of this, the state of schools is the tumultuous nature of the events happening at the Federal Department of Education. Indeed, the chaotic and unknown nature of the events in DC has educators, administrators, and school boards walking on eggshells and anxious about doing anything to further upset the system. Just last week, for example, schools were threatened with losing federal funds for simply complying with Act 1 from 2019 that was passed and signed into law, calling for all Vermont schools to teach an honest curriculum about our history and to do it in a racially sensitive manner. It is with this backdrop that Vermont EA reviewed the bill 452, and through a lens of doing no harm to the educational system, shaking the system snow globe even more after surviving the pandemic, including the loss of federal pandemic recovery funds and the new student weights that are still becoming better known, could do affirmative harm to our students and the education they receive. This is not to say any change is ill-advised, but change for the sake of change is not helpful. 454 has a timeline for implementation that, while aggressive, is realistic in addressing the current challenges facing our education system. The bill protects educators' right to collectively bargain, who are feeling under attack by the culture wars and the educator shortage, which is real and extremely troubling now and well into the future. In other words, the educator shortage has been around for a while, and there's no anticipated end in sight. As there is no pipeline of educators stepping forward to fill the innumerable vacancies, notwithstanding the 400 layoffs, and the bill does nothing to exacerbate that educator shortage. That's good. We do have some concerns with the bill. The class size section is concerning because we know there is no perfect size, and in fact, we know that this is one of the characteristics that makes our schools special and often a goal of other states. Make no mistake, micro classes are not good, but setting a class size number in statute may have unintended consequences for students. Additionally, it may be used to close small rural schools without community buy-in. And while the exemptions may allow some schools that just cannot ever meet the goals of the bill to remain open, it is a concern that, again, there could be unintended consequences. Furthermore, the intent language to achieve schools' size targets needs to include school construction funding to support funding support to ever be achieved. Without school construction funding, school size targets will never be realized. The financing aspects of the bill, again, are mixed. The cost factor foundation formula does achieve equity in the moment, as I think Jay spoke to, and reflects the real cost of educating Vermont's kids. But as with any formula, the inflator must be realistic, and it must have teeth if it is cast aside for political expediency. Further, we have concerns with the political appointee adjusting the foundation formula, even with guardrails that are in place, as is found in Section 34 of the bill. So I'm venturing a little bit in the finance world, but
That's our section.
pardon me?
That's our section.
Okay. For example, there is no appeal process if a school district believes the inflation isn't what it should be. And even if a district or any interested party believed the amount wasn't accurate, the language gives the secretary the authority to set the inflation rate, and a court likely would give that language by the Secretary of Education its full intended meaning. Moreover, relying on the U.S. Department of Commerce for data right now more than ever is a mistake. Moreover, Professor Colby suggested using labor market inflation tool and using a labor market inflation tool and not a generic inflation device. Additionally, as you've talked about earlier, we suggest adding a healthcare inflator aspect to Section 34 so as to recognize what we all know to be the single largest cost driver, the cost of healthcare. Vermont NEA has been suggesting for some time that the state move to a reference-based pricing structure for hospitals that have more than 200 beds, as has been successfully implemented in other states. That alone would reduce education property spending by upwards of $30 million next year. And finally, misspelled that, sorry. Because the Finance Committee still has the yield bill, rather than doing a universal rate buy down, should be used a portion of which to reserve monies to reduce property taxes in a targeted way for working class Vermonters, but leave as is the current tax on the wealthiest among us. This will allow some Vermonters to see their tax bill lowered, while those Vermonters with means to pay would otherwise have their tax set at normal rates. A better approach altogether would be to adopt an income-based education tax for all Vermonters. Vermont NEA has long advocated for a three-step approach to lowering and then eliminating property taxes for Vermont residents. First, adjust the income sensitivity thresholds to account for inflation, which has never happened. Second, examine what is now coming out of the Ed Fund that was not previously coming out of the Ed Fund. And finally, move to an income-based education tax for all Vermonters, which is fair and more understandable taxing system. Thank you for the opportunity to address some of our concerns with H454. More importantly, thank you for recognizing the excellent work our educators and students are doing in Vermont's local public schools. When all is said and done, publicly funded schools are Vermont's most important resource, a resource our kids depend on and deserve on their journey to becoming happy, healthy, and productive adults. And thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yes.
So I think we're struggling, I'll just speak for myself. There's a struggle around honoring the data-informed way that Tammy Colby came to the weights that she came to, and the reality that some of our districts just answered the call of a different weighting system, and they would have to they would be responding to new information in the last 2 years that would change the weights for high schools, for, just different weighting systems. And I don't know if you've seen what JFO has done for us, but it does show potential winners and losers in whose district would lose more or gain more.
Under the foundation.
Under the foundation formula. And we just used one approximation to counties. That was the BSBA map. That was not a proposed map in this process, but is closest to counties of everything we're looking at. And there were winners and losers. I don't know if your members have discussed the foundation formula and what it could do when it's implemented to make some districts go through a new mathematical calculation about their budgets and what that means for personnel.
Can I just jump in? Because I think what you're saying, you also said, but implied in what you said is with Dr. Colby's weights.
Yeah.
Because
That's 127.
because that's
Right.
no new weights, because the House bill used the new weights.
Okay.
that
Right.
she did. And I think
Yes.
what you're asking is kind of we just went through new weights 2 years ago. We have some districts just getting used to that. And now the House version has a whole new set of weights and has another round of pretty serious disruption in some places. And so and I think implied in that question is, we have the existing weights that we can convert from tax capacity to spending and keep them sort of steady with what people just begin to get used to, or go to a whole new set of weights.
And I guess I would just say, like, the last conversation I had with teachers in my district, which from what I saw, might experience a cut, CBU and South Burlington experience a cut. The teachers were like, we thought we just got to a district that's stable,
Right.
and now we're being cut. So, and that was without, another education reform proposal. So I'm just trying to reckon with the reality that I have a lot of teachers in my community who would probably struggle with a formula that yet again changed the landscape.
Vermont took no position on the bill in the House, just for the record.
Okay.
And so one of the things we struggle with is, as you pointed out, there are winners and losers in every construct. And in this construct, in this proposal, again, there are winners and losers. And some of my board, for example, would see this as a win. So take, for example, some of the lower spending schools in the state. I'll just say it that way. They might do really well under the new system with the foundation formula plus weights on top of it. And that would be a service to those communities and those students, truly. And there are others, as you noted, are not doing so well under the new system and coming out of the new, not so new weights, that are 2-year-old weights, I'll say it that way. that is more change upon change. One of the things I didn't talk about is the timeline of this bill. I won't compare it to any other bills that are, or ideas that are out there, but I will say that we like this timeline better than some other concepts that are out there, because it does allow for phasing in and time to sort of digest what is being proposed. And you're right, CVU, for example, in the last 2 years, I think has lost 88 educators. And so they're sizably affected by weights, loss of ARPA funds, and other factors. And so they are significantly challenged in this moment, and adding further challenge to that might not be in their best interest, or nor their students' best interest. I know that they've lost a music director, I guess, at CVU, and I know that some parents are not happy about that. I've heard. So, and that's in the current.
Right.
And that's,
Yeah.
and that's not applying anything from Act 454,
Yeah.
H 454.
Right.
So adding to that might really not be a good idea. So again, the timeline, this phases in a lot slower than some other ideas that are out there. That's, we think, is a good thing. It's a long-winded answer to say.
No.
It's complicated, it's mixed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
If I could, so I understand the intro in your statement was very positively spun, and I appreciate that. At the same time, I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that according to AOE statistics, 50% of our, from all grades, 50% of our kids are below proficiency in math and reading across the board, all grades, regardless of how we stack up against, in 8th grade, literacy. That's a good thing, but
It's an excellent thing. Yeah, I mean, it's
but in both topics, that all the grades are 50% below proficiency. That's really shocking. That got a lot of attention over the past year or 2 years. And that's what a lot of folks are reacting to. So I understand that the intent is to spin positive. I get that. We all want to do that, but
It's not a spin. I believe it, actually. And I think the NAEP test is what you're talking about or alluding to, is but one test that schools don't even get the results of. So I don't know that we should be relying on.
Statewide statistics for the AOE. I get it. It's not school specific. It's purposely not school specific, and we all know why.
Yeah. The other day, just so, I had a meeting, the Commission on the Future of Public Education, and we had a breakout room. I was with the secretary there, with some others. And we talked about whether we should be doing, I firmly believe we're testing the wrong things, right? I mean, I based it on what Raj Chetty, who's a professor out of Harvard, now Stanford. We're testing the wrong thing. So I think that we ought to look seriously about what we test and why.
Okay, that's another conversation, but currently the testing that we're using, we've all agreed to use, is showing some pretty dire indicators that need a reaction. And that's what we're trying to do, that's one of the issues that we're reacting to. But I wanted to go back on the third page. You had 3 recommendations for lowering the cost of property taxes, and I appreciate that. You're like one of the few guys that's come in here and give us some very specific examples. And no, seriously, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
But I think in summary, you're looking to possibly move from property tax funding for education to income tax funding for education.
Quite explicitly, I hope.
Okay, I just want to make,
Yes.
there's a couple words here that make it a little bit ambiguous, but
All right.
I want to make it very,
I'll say it more emphatically. Vermont EA would like to abolish the property tax for residents and move to an income-based tax to pay for education.
okay. Thank you, Joe.
Is that, I mean,
For year-round resident, no,
for residents, right? Residents.
for people who claim Vermont residency,
Correct.
which is like,
Yeah, so what I was reacting to was move to an income-based education for all the Mars. That's close, but it's not quite.
Okay.
Okay, I want to be very clear that.
Residents. So you say for all residents, Vermont residents or something. Thank you for the edit. I saw another misspelling there, and I will try to do better in grammar checking.
can you send the Raj Chetty?
Sure.
I'm a big Raj Chetty.
Yeah. I haven't looked at it in a while, but he's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's also the one who advocated for paying kindergarten teachers $360,000. So that's,
Love Raj Chetty.
yeah,
I am a huge fan.
you want to see
Yeah.
what success kids have later in life
Yeah.
look to their kindergarten teacher, and we should be paying the value of a great kindergarten teacher is $360,000.
You'd be a great witness for us to get for a joint hearing.
Yeah.
I took classes at the Harvard Graduate School of Education with some of his colleagues who do economics and education in the fall.
Yeah,
Program.
it's interesting, provocative, and thought provoking. I think, I like it too. It's interesting. But I will get you. I think it's a podcast.
That's probably even better right
Yeah,
now.
it's fun. It's
honestly,
fun.
for my
Right, you're on the
Right.
podcast. We all do.
Any other questions? No, thank you.
Thank you.
So sticking to the, Nicole, are you on, by the way? Yeah. She is.
Yes, I am here.
And Nicole, are you okay waiting for a few more minutes, or is it, I know you're at work.
I'm fine. I can wait.
Okay, okay, too. No, come on, we'll do it in order then. So one more in front of you, okay?
Stuff there.
For the record.
Yes, for the record, my name is Jamie Canardi, and this is my 5th year serving as the superintendent of schools of the White River Valley Supervisory Union. And prior to that, I served as a principal at the Williamstown Schools for 7 years. I want to begin by once again thanking the Senate Education Committee for allowing me to testify on H454 this afternoon. And I'll refer to our supervisory union as the WRVSU for the remainder of my testimony. I'm going to focus my testimony today on my concerns specific to the provisions provided via H454 regarding Section 3, scale intent, class size standards, and Section 7, school size intent. The beginning of Section 3 of H454 states, "It is the intent of the General Assembly to transform education in Vermont by leveraging attainable and research-based scale to increase equity of opportunity and promote efficiency and affordability." I want to begin by pointing out that the definition of equity does not mean equality, or that we're going to create public schools that ensure everyone will have the exact same classroom experience. Instead, I've dedicated my entire career to advocating for the importance of the personalization of the educational experience. I believe that the class size minimums introduced into H454 are nothing more than a tool for larger, depersonalized district boards to have the means to act on closing smaller elementary, middle, or high schools within a newly formed unified district. I believe this because we have proof that this has already occurred within some unified districts that formed in haste due to Act 46, and it will most definitely occur again if we are to deliver on the property tax relief offered as the reason for why we need to transform Vermont's public education system once again. The class sizes provided via the bill do not take into account significant cost drivers, though. For example, it doesn't take into account academic interventionists, behavioral support services, paraeducator supports, mental health supports, or related service provider supports like SLPs, OTs, PTs. Yet, when you look at the increase in FTEs that my colleague Ryan Harity provided you a few weeks back from across the state, was in his slideshow, the areas that have grown the most are excluded from this provision of the bill. For example, from 2020 to 2024, behavioral specialists across the state have increased by 71 FTEs, behavior interventionists by 145, reading interventionists by 158, math interventionists by 103, and in-service training staff, which the AOE notes is non-instructional, by 62. I share this information to be clear that we need to get a lot better at how we measure efficiency. And equity needs to stand for more than only utilizing average class sizes that would more than likely, within the WRVSU, close the Newton School in Stratford, Vermont. The Newton School has a long history of serving its students in a fiscally responsible manner that delivers on high-quality student outcomes. Newton School traditionally performs well above the state standards in math, literacy, and science. It also qualifies as a Title I receiving school. Yet, due to the intention of creating equity, H454 determines that Newton can no longer meet the needs of our students based purely on the class size minimum standards. I also have a great deal of trouble within the provision within H454 that allows for a newly formed unified district board to be the one to apply for a waiver if the school doesn't meet the class size minimums. That process relies again on a depersonalized board to advocate for that rural community school. And the definition for geographic isolation is yet to be determined. That school could end up closed because of its size and nothing to do with academic and social emotional performance metrics, community satisfaction, or efficiency in regards to that per pupil cost. I also remain concerned with the arbitrary nature of indicating that it's the intent to create schools that operate grades 6 through 12 to have a minimum average daily membership of 450 students. I have the same concern with this requirement as I do with the minimum class size numbers, because it communicates that a school of 260 students cannot provide for the same high quality education as a school with 450. My experience as a principal and superintendent would indicate that that is not true. I shared with you testimony 2 weeks ago about the success of the White River Unified District. That success is evident in student achievement measures, increased graduation rates, and fiscal responsibility. Yet this provision indicates that 365 average daily membership in the White River Unified District, 6 through 12, is not providing for an optimal educational experience. I would argue that our community and the surrounding communities that tuition over 80 students to our in grades 6 through 12 at our public middle high school have a differing opinion. I'd also be remiss today if I didn't mention how important I believe it is to include the supervisory union as a viable governance structure moving forward. My previous testimony focused on that, so I wanted to re-emphasize this, but not speak to all of my reasons to support the SU structure and the equity for which it allows. It is my hope that you continue to advocate for the viability of the supervisory union structure and include them in any bill that you move forward for reconciliation with the House. Finally, I ask that we ensure that any bill we move forward has accountability measures built within it to ensure greater personalization, increased outcomes for our students, results in increased financial efficiencies because all schools are held to the same accountability standards, and does not indicate via the provisions provided that smaller schools are resulting in less equity, increased cost, and undesired outcomes. I strongly urge you to strike any and all language provided with H454, class size standards, and school size intent. Thank you.
Yes. I have one, when you talk about the SUs, retaining SUs, is it your view that we should retain SUs everywhere, or that SUs are a vehicle that makes sense in our structure, a structure that makes sense in some parts of the state, not necessarily all? I haven't really thought that for myself. So
no, I appreciate that. I mean, I think in order for the SU structure to be viable, I do think it needs interdependence and partnership, right? And so if there was districts that would prefer to operate within a supervisory district structure, I would understand that. But the notion that SUs cannot be efficient or allow for one superintendent, I mean, I'm a superintendent across 10 towns. I just wanted to clarify that when Jay was talking about one superintendent, supervisory unions have one superintendent. And so I would say though, I think if you look, you could create SUs that may partner 2 to 3 districts, still allow for local voice and decision-making, but get you to that 2,000 to 4,000 size that if you're looking at.
okay. Thank you. Yes.
If you understood my question about the ward advisory task force, do you have thoughts on one group coming up with that structure for every district?
I mean, I would say to you, the articles of agreement, which I think is what you're getting to, that we all created during mergers of Act 46,
Yeah.
right? That allowed for local voice to come together to decide what was important in regards to those mergers to occur and holds those boards into the future accountable to them. Right. And so therefore, I think it's critical that we allow that to happen locally if we're going to say that there's going to be those forced types of mergers. Because they got to create more buy-in, right? And as someone who became a superintendent 5 years ago, that was our SU had just merged and districts were formed the year prior. I've heard some folks say, well, the supervisory structure is not as viable because I'm not able to do instructional leadership. I would tell you that's absolutely false. I'm in schools every day. My SU colleagues are in schools every day. I meet with principals every Tuesdays and Thursdays in their schools to do rounds from 9 to noon. I did not today because I was working on this. But what I would say to you is, I'm getting to this point. If you do forced mergers of districts, that superintendent's going to be putting out fires in regards to folks feeling like harm was done because that was a state level decision and they're unhappy about it. And they're going to be doing everything in regards to management and nothing focused on increase in academic outcomes, paying attention to efficiencies and cost. Right? Like I'm in there meeting with my principals, my business managers to build those budgets to present to my boards. We're doing zero-based budgeting. Like that's the expectation that I have in regards to how we do our work. If I'm spending time trying to navigate in regards to a lot of folks upset about their local school being closed because of a larger district decision, and that's going to take me away from being able to do that work around just to monitoring financial efficiencies, right? And being responsible, but also making certain all those kids are growing individually. So the more we can increase local voice in regards to these decisions, I think the more successful we're going to be as a state. Did I answer?
Yes, yeah.
Senator Leeds, just a curiosity question on first page, you were talking about significant cost drivers at the bottom of the page. Said it doesn't take into account, and you listed a series of different education practitioners. But weren't all these highlighted in the detailed labor spreadsheets that the Secretary of Education provided for the theoretical structure of schools?
These are labeled in regards to classifications, how we would fund them with the weights. I'm speaking specific to H454, the provisions around class sizes. It does not take into account any of these positions. All it takes into account is, and it literally says it in the bill, that these FTEs do not have anything to do with the class sizes. So really what I'm saying is you can't say that the only metrics to use in regards to whether a school is being efficient is grade level or content area teacher.
Okay. Then a question on Newton School. Not familiar with Newton, and I'm just curious, there's got to be a little bit more here to help us digest this. Is it, I assume that it's the total student population or the class sizes are below what's being discussed in 454. But are there any other mitigating circumstances, like it's small by necessity, like geography or any? So you're just worried that it's too close to another school that's also below the threshold that's in 454.
Not necessarily below, but maybe could take those, just scoop those students up. And my concern is if you look at the metrics in regards to like the foundation formula, that schools that, let's say, have 400 students nearby, if you look to analyze what they're going to have decreased revenue resulting from this, frankly, because they're spending more than even a school like Newton that may not make class sizes. But if you ask me, like, can you introduce the foundation formula? Yeah, we can. Like, we operate really efficiently.
So why would they have a lower foundation formula or total budget?
Because they're spending more than that foundation is going to provide. So my whole point is, just because a school is right size, right by the bill, let's say 450 and maintaining above these minimum sizes, doesn't mean that they're efficient. So I'm just saying, if we're really going to get at like what are the cost drivers, we got to make certain we build in to this legislation what I think is one of the things is like, are we actually looking at what the per pupil cost is? There's this idea like larger districts and larger schools are going to result in decreased cost, and we just don't have good metrics that share that. What I would say is, if we want to get after the cost, let's say like, this is what you should be spending per pupil.
So that's kind of one of the primary premises for the H.
I'm not opposed to the foundation.
We know it by school, what the budgets are per student. We do that math all the time with our superintendents.
I'm saying
Half of them are below a 4-day, conceived 4-day foundation formula, and half of them are above.
And you need the reasoning for these larger districts, I believe, is to create enough scale and size around these weights to allow for that district to like possibly continue to operate the way it has been. Because you've got enough size now in scope. If you close some smaller schools and you gain those pupils, then your base amount is going to be okay. And if you look, some of our larger districts are spending a lot more than some of our middle and smaller districts. And so what I'm saying to you is that may not change our behavior. Am I making sense of what I'm trying to say? By closing the smaller schools and just moving these students into a system that we know is not operating efficiently. I don't believe that that's like, all right, they gain those pupils' weights, but I don't really believe that that means that that district's going to tighten its belt more. Does that make sense?
I hear you.
And I believe that that's why the weighting and the introduction of the new districts have to go hand in hand. Right? Because they need to spread out those larger districts to increase the weights to make this work if you look at those maps. And that is something I'm really fearful
about. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. I want to go back to you. I want to jump to Nicole.
Thanks.
Because I know I just want to go to Nicole. Actually, somewhere at 4. For no other reason, I've been somewhere at 4, and I want to be at 4 for Nicole's testimony. So, Nicole, can you introduce yourself for the record?
Yes, my name is Nicole Whan. I am on the school board for the Arlington School District, and I'm one of 3 representatives from Arlington for the Southwest Vermont Supervisory Union.
And just to be clear, so the committee understands, you're from the sort of the northernmost part of that SU, and you are in a district with Mount Anthony, Union High School, middle school, and others as well. But that's your thing. Yeah. Okay. So you're a smaller school in a larger district with a larger high school.
Correct. And part of what I feel a little out of my league with everyone else who has spoken today, but I believe my place for being here is to talk about what our small school, the importance that we play within the region.
Yep.
And I have some information to kind of demonstrate how we fit within the overall structure within the southwestern part of the state, and also some data about what our small school has been able to do.
Thanks. That's it. I think, frankly, that's great. You framed it well. So you're on.
Okay. And these are my notes. Honestly, this is the first time I've ever been through this process. I didn't really know what was expected. This was what I was going to read from, and then I saw everybody else submit testimony, so I sent Will my notes. So here we go. The Arlington School District operates grades pre-K through 12 and is part of the Southwest Vermont Supervisory Union. Arlington previously operated within the Battenkill Valley Supervisory Union, with Sandgate as a non-operating district. We were the smallest SU in the state, and through Act 46, the State Board of Education dissolved the BVSU and moved Arlington and Sandgate to the SVSU. It should be noted that while there were some operational efficiencies gained with a larger governance structure, there were no cost savings, and no improvement in educational opportunities for Arlington schools with this change. Within Bennington County, we have the SVSU with just over 3,000 students and the Bennington-Rutland Supervisory Union, the BRSU, with about 2,200 students. Arlington is the only pre-K through 12 public school district in the county, and Arlington Memorial High School is one of 2 public high schools in Bennington County. Bennington County has 37,000 residents. AMHS has an enrollment of 200 students, grades 6 through 12. Mount Anthony Middle School, High School has an enrollment of 1,500 students, grades 6 through 12. I don't know how much you know about the operational structures within our region. Arlington is pre-K through 12. Sandgate is a non-operating pre-K through 12. Southwest Vermont Union Elementary District is pre-K through 5. Mount Anthony Middle High School, 6 through 12. North Bennington is non-operating pre-K through 5 and a member of the MAU Middle School High School District. And then within the BRSU, the Taconic and Green operates pre-K through 8 and is in non-operating 9 through 12. We also have the Southwest Tech Center, which is on the campus with Mount Anthony High School. To give you some sense, through Act 129, allowing for public high school choice, Arlington usually has 11 to 14 students from MAU in grades 9 through 12. No tuition follows these students, which impacts our ability to provide transportation and therefore limits access for families who can't provide their own transportation. I know this is not the topic we're discussing, but just as an aside, I had mentioned to Seth previously, although Act 129 only addresses grades 9 through 12, for those students who are considering Arlington as a smaller high school option, it would be beneficial if they could make the transition in middle school during this critical developmental stage. For Arlington families who are looking for a larger high school, they can attend MAU in Bennington, and there have been a few students in the past couple of years who make that choice. There are also some Arlington families who elect to send their students to BBA or Long Trail in Manchester. In these situations, the families are paying out of pocket $20,000+ as a non-resident tuition, or in some instances, I believe BBA has made arrangements to offer scholarships to certain students. Arlington receives tuitioning students. Pre-K, we have 5 students from Sandgate and Sunderland. Elementary, we have 16 from Sandgate, 1 from North Bennington. Middle school, high school, we have 17 from Sandgate, 3 from Sunderland, 1 Manchester, 1 Rupert, 2 Dorset. Arlington may be a smaller district, but we're an important part of our educational system in our region. And I have some just information to help put that in some context. We are 350 students enrolled. Our long-term weighted ADM is 635. Our total budget for FY26 is $9.8 million, which gives us a $13,417 ed spending per long-term weighted ADM. With that, we are able to offer, we have 2 full-time art teachers and full-time music teachers. We offer art and music across all pre-K through 12 grades. We offer Chinese and French as a foreign language at the high school. We have STEM and woodshop classes offered at the high school. We have 7 AP classes. We have 23 students who attend Southwest Tech. We have 5 students participating in internship programs, and 75% of our students participate in co-curricular activities. For our graduating class last year of 39 students, we had a 100% graduation rate. 53% of those students went on to college, 9% went into career education, 3% into the military, 27% were employed, 8% undecided or took a gap year. And we were fortunate, in a small town, we had 4 international students, which was a wonderful experience for our small community. I won't read through the list necessarily, but to give you a sense of how well prepared our students are, of those 53 who went on to college, the schools that they were accepted into, I will read for anyone who's listening: American University, Clarkson University, Duke, Franklin Pierce, Hudson Valley, Lemoyne College, MCLA, MIT, Notre Dame, Rhode Island School of Design, Russell Sage, UVM, Vermont State University, Wentworth Institute of Technology, and Williams College. So when it comes to finding the right fit, a bigger school isn't necessarily a better school. Each of the schools in our region brings something unique to the table. And with the statewide conversations about structural changes, we have initiated conversations across the different districts and supervisory unions and intend to include the independent schools and the tech center to see how we can collaborate to ensure that we're providing the best educational opportunities for students in our region. And I believe my reason for being here is to say the changes that are proposed would negatively impact the Arlington School District, which would have a detrimental impact on the quality of public education opportunities in Arlington and in our region. Hopefully, as you craft your plan going forward, you understand that one size does not fit all, and that there is a place for strong, small schools being a critical part of our public education system. And that's it.
Thanks. Nicole, can you comment on, you said that you've got students coming up from Bennington or Powell, wherever they're coming from, who would otherwise be in Manhattan. Can you give the committee a feel for why those students are making that choice to make the trek rather than?
You know, students, no one size school is right for all students. These are students who have made the decision, whether it's small class size, overall small school size, program offerings that we have. For whatever reason, the family made the decision to elect to have their student be part of a smaller school. Mount Anthony's big. And I think for some families, and I can only speak anecdotally, for the students who have made the decision to come. In the graduating class last year, we had 2 who were coming specifically, I believe, for the AP program offering. And we have kids who fall through the cracks at MAU. And we're not necessarily on the path to graduating and have found success in a smaller environment where they can receive the attention that they need.
Any other questions? Okay, Nicole, thank you.
Yep, thank you.
That was helpful. Thank you.
Yep.
You're welcome to stay on, by the way, and listen, should you have time to do that. I know you're at work, but so, Dr. Cheryl Charles.
Well, thank you. Thank you, senators. Thank you for the opportunity to join you today. I am Cheryl Charles, as the senator just said. I'm in my 10th year as a school board member. I represent Westminster. I chair the school board in Westminster. I also chair the board of the Wyndham Northeast Supervisory Union. And very recently, with the formation of the Rural School Community Alliance, which you've heard about and which you've had testimony from in the last couple of weeks, when it was first formed, I was asked to serve as the chair of the steering committee for this newly formed alliance, which I'm happy to do. Westminster was one of the first towns to join through our school board, now our select board. And in the beginning, and this was in January, there were a handful of towns, I think you know, and they're still coming up every day and asking to join us. So we're now more than 90. And what that means is that either a town school board or a select board put a warned item on their agenda to decide whether or not to join this alliance. And I think what that represents right now is the concern of many of the rural townspeople throughout the state about what has been proposed in terms of education transformation, initially with the governor's proposal and then more recently with 454. The Rural School Community Alliance today provided you with 2 documents. One is very specific to school classroom sizes and school sizes, simply a chart that looks at some of the considerations around that and our recommendations to you about that specific to the law. The second document is a more detailed listing of concerns around 454. And so there are a variety of topics that are addressed in that document in particular. What I'll start with is really class sizes and school sizes. And it's just to reinforce that a requirement for class sizes is not an effective way to approach this issue. What we have currently, and consistent with the law, are guidelines, and they give us a range through which to serve children through class sizes, and that remains an appropriate way to go. And we as board members look at that, and we look at our class sizes at every level. We do it routinely, but we certainly do it during budget season to see what's the distribution of the number of kids to teachers throughout the school. And we just want to say that please don't put in those mandates. Allow it still to be a range that's appropriate, that's age appropriate, that's instructionally appropriate. And with respect to the size of schools, we think that the numbers proposed in the legislation, again, are not reflective of what's appropriate in Vermont in terms of population distribution or geography. And in both cases, research is not there to support the recommendations in the law. You know, there is clear evidence in the research to support small class sizes, and those are tied to educational outcomes. But there is not evidence, as you know, and you've heard this a variety of times already, I think, consolidation doesn't necessarily save money. We know that. We've seen that historically in Vermont. And those class size numbers that were provided by some of the external consultants are not as relevant to Vermont. So I would really caution you about putting too much weight around those, certainly not 450 for a given school or 4,000 for a larger district. I'm happy to say more about those things. I have heard a number of things today I'd love to be able to comment on also, but I came to focus on cautions around creating mandates having to do with either class size or school size. If I can make a couple of other comments, I'd love to.
For sure.
Thank you. Well, one is listening to Jay Nichols today about supervisory unions versus school districts. And I would love to have this committee really dive into the strengths and the merits, the pros and cons of each. One comment that Jay made today, I have an alternative example of something that is working. He talked about in a supervisory union, if teachers move from one school district to another. I have that situation in Wyndham Northeast where I chair that board. We've got Athens and Grafton and Rockingham and Westminster. We made a change in the collective bargaining agreement a year ago with our teachers to allow any teacher who moves from one town school district to another to not lose their seniority. And that was an example he gave today. So we have amended that through a legal agreement to protect teachers. It just struck us as not being fair to penalize a teacher who works for 10 years here and then is needed in another school, or let's say that school size population changed. So we wanted to make sure that a teacher throughout the supervisory unit was not penalized by having to make a move like that. And there are other kinds of things like that. You know, we know the difference between a locally elected school board for a rural town that has that thin participatory democracy, that meaningful, relevant engagement by the citizens, versus when it's so far removed. And we've seen that, you know, our friends and neighbors to the south with Wyndham Southeast, when that forced merger put together all of those school districts, dissolve the local school boards. One of the risks there is an erosion of participation at the local level. We in Westminster, you know, were an independent town school district, then we were merged with Athens and Grafton, and then we successfully became once again a town school district. And I've seen the difference, you know, again in my 10th year, I've seen the difference in the engagement at town meetings. The senator may have also seen that since he comes to those those meetings. So I would really want you to look and recognize that there really are benefits to a supervisory union, especially in the rural areas. And the point that Superintendent Canardi made a few minutes ago, you can have larger school districts within then an ever larger supervisory union. But we just want, on behalf of the Alliance, we just want to make sure that the value of supervisory unions in some areas continues to be recognized and not to dissolve all of those as some have suggested. That might also be helpful if I made a reference to some of the budget issues and cost considerations. We all know that a year ago, March at town meeting, there was this concern throughout the state about a 20% increase in school budgets and such. And I wanted to refer to the fact that Westminster school budget at that time went up by 4.2%. And that we have throughout the supervisory union, Wyndham Northeast, there were no towns in double-digit tax increases, none. And this most current year, we actually brought our budget down a little bit, even with the rising cost of healthcare insurance, even with new teacher agreements having been settled, even with rising costs in special education. So this is just to say that you really do have high quality, low cost rural schools and rural school districts doing a good job for kids and for taxpayers. And so with all of that, we want to be, we at Rural School Community Alliance want to be of help to you. We're happy to take assignments and to have you tell us, could you give us your alliance's opinion on something? We have a number of us, that have expertise that we can draw on in a lot of different areas. And so we're happy to help you with evidence, to help you with specific recommendations. But for today, it was just, please don't mandate either school sizes or classroom sizes. So, Brennan?
And any position or anything to say about the notion of switching to a foundational formula?
We actually do think that is worth trying. We actually support your effort to do so. We recommend adding the idea of professional judgment panel, that external review group that would help.
Before we change the weights.
Exactly. Yeah, and to look at actually the recommendations that come up. I think what we have looked at, others in the Alliance are more prepared than I to speak to this, but I do know that our position is to support exploration of it and to use the professional judgment panel idea that was built into it. And to start with current budget levels, where you are with current weights, that kind of thing, not to try a new system at this time.
Thank you. Thanks.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much.
You bet.
So I think that if you're listening, you're not. So maybe stop. Yes. Yeah. Good point. Quick break. You do have Beth coming, I think at 3:30. If she is not otherwise.